We'll call the meeting to order, a special call board meeting of Public Employees Retirement System. Welcome, everyone, and everything good to go, Ray, on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's make sure everything okay with the streaming, everything working. And then we also have the phone line open for those that need to call in. If you want to, at the proper time, we could check to make sure who's on there.
Okay. Well, we have the approval of the agenda. If I may, I'd like.
Maybe a board member on there, so if we could. You
Oh,
want to go ahead
okay,
and,
sorry.
To my understanding, Dr. Rutledge was unable to join today, but board member Terrence Yarborough was going to call in. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right. And then Actuary Ed Coble should be calling in. Ed, are you there?
I am here.
And then are there any other participants in the meeting that are on the phone line? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Ray.
No problem.
We've got the approval of the agenda. I'd like to ask for a motion to amend the agenda to add in the minutes from the December 2024 meeting, since we're available and meeting anyway, and add it onto the agenda for the board to consider approval of. Is there a motion?
And listening to the conversation yesterday in the committee, do we also need to add approval of the change in language for the unfunded liability to net pension liability?
You certainly could. However you want to do that. We had talked briefly, I was going to give an update on legislative stuff in other, and that's when I was going to cover that and address it, but however you prefer to do it, if you want to add legislative update or however you want to
If
do it.
everybody's good with it being in other, it's just a little less formalized,
Okay,
determined
yeah,
on what it's
yeah,
going to
I'm
be
good.
about
That's
compared
fine.
to the minutes.
I just didn't know when or
either
if it
way.
needed to be done.
Thank you.
Well, I think that discussion, we are familiar with UAAL. We're not familiar with the other term. So I do think that we would need some clarification as to what that is, and if from this point forward, the actuary, what language is he going to use so that we will be on the same page with that.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a topic. I guess from my standpoint, the minutes are simple. They're there and you can approve them. What that is, I don't know what that is quite yet without some discussion to see what the motion may need to be. That's the only reason.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda with the amendment.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any questions, discussion?
Smith, you make a second?
Yes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And we will move on to discussion of Tier 5 and leave that with you, Mr. Higgins, to take it away.
Just one little quick confirmation, and I was following that, but I might have been looking ahead a little bit too. I want to make sure and ask the AG opinion. I know that was a motion to approve amending the agenda with the minutes. Does that also include that the December minutes are approved?
No.
We have a motion to approve, okay, but the agenda's good to go.
I think so. Yeah, the agenda, I believe, is, but we still need a motion to approve the December minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure, cool.
Let me back
I'll make
up
a
a
motion
second.
to approve the minutes.
I'll second. We have a motion and a second on approval of the minutes. Anybody need more time or have questions about the minutes?
Yeah, I do. I got a question on that. If we make a motion and pass a motion, okay, this is convoluted in my mind. Y'all help me. If we do something can you amend the minutes after they're approved, or can you amend them before they're approved? If the board chooses to approve a motion that may affect those minutes. Now, that's kind of what I'm asking, Caroline.
I would like to ask Caroline, but I think that if you're going to propose changing the minutes, I think that needs to be discussed and handled before the minutes are approved, or at least during that approval process. But
Yes, I agree. We need to have the minutes approved after.
you said after they're amended, if they're going to be.
Then I would suggest that we leave the approval of the minutes until after we get through with the discussion of the Tier 5.
Motion to table the minutes until after Tier 5?
Yeah.
A question. anything that would happen today does not affect what occurred back in December. That would be a parliamentary inquiry, I guess.
That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, come on, go ahead and grab a microphone if you don't mind, just because, so he can, everything can hear real good. But yes, the question is about approving the minutes for December, which have already occurred.
Right.
Yeah.
So, just to be clear, you're talking about approving the minutes from December?
That's what the motion is, but
Yes.
if there is something that occurs in this meeting that would have an impact and might change those minutes in some other direction, would it need to be a separate, or, I don't know whether you can do that before you actually approve the minutes. Now, because what the senator said is right, that was voted on and that was approved. Now, there's a good chance that I'm going to make a motion today to do something else. And if that occurs, and if I ask it to be included in that motion or use that motion and modify that motion with my language, how do you handle that?
I think I could jump in
From my
here and
standpoint,
say
it'll be
it's
in the
better to
minutes
have
for
it on-
today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
because-
better to
Yeah.
have it as a separate issue. Really, minutes should be for clarification or correction of actual errors that existed. So for instance, if I wanted to say, well, actually, it was Mr. Dale that made the motion for the administrative committee to, well, that ain't what happened. So you couldn't change that to now make it reflect that. So I think, like Ray's saying, probably best to keep them as is unless there's corrections, clarifications, or additions that may clarify. But that it is whatever happened. And then these minutes would reflect whatever motion and approval.
That's
would go.
fine. I mean, that was voted on. That is what happened. So, I mean, I was just wondering if I make a motion that has an impact on that and it's approved by the board. Yeah. So that would be in these minutes then.
Yes.
Right.
And could we then today approve the minutes of this meeting?
Don't really know the exact question of that, but what I could say we certainly could do is if you just give us like a few, 24 hours or something, we could get it. If you're wanting them approved and posted quickly, we could just have a quick call tomorrow, the board, and do that or something to that effect. If you give us, I don't know.
Just
I'm not
enough
really
time to
sure on the answer.
compile
If there's
them.
any rule, we can't, but we can do it quickly as long as we get the minutes done unless there's a legal thing.
Right, the compilation of them is probably the most difficult to.
Yeah. But we can do it soon if that's the desire.
I'm good. Then.
All right, so we have a motion and a second for approval of the minutes. Am I remembering that correctly? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Now, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you again, Mr.
For
Chairman.
Tier 5 discussion?
Thank you again, and that's exactly right, a discussion of Tier 5, which I'm happy to talk or give a little bit more of an overview on, but I think I'm just going to wrap up real briefly and defer back to the board or board members. And of course, we have Ed Coble, the actuary, online or on the phone if you would like to hear from him. Just briefly, there are the materials, the slide deck that is before you in hard copy. There's also a spreadsheet, I believe. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions or go through or to provide a little bit of an overview of what's in there, or I can just simply turn it back over to the board, whichever you prefer.
Why don't we have Ed go through the slides?
Okay.
And then we can have comments, questions, anything else from the board as he goes through his part, and including any comments you may want to make on the way.
Mr. Chairman, I would say that we've been through all of these slides previously with the exception of the 1% COLA. So having gone through, and the 1.6 plan there, and I had told Ed in a conversation that was one of two things that I had asked Ed to work on. And I told Ed after reviewing that would not work either to satisfy what I wanted to do. And I told the chairman, told Mr. Higgins that you could just leave that off. There's no reason to discuss it. Even I wouldn't vote for that. So if you take out the 1.6 plan, we've talked at length about current tier 4, the PERS, and as far as I'm concerned, we can do away with that tier 5 from 2024 after looking at what the Rules Committee did yesterday, and that would only leave the state-sponsored hybrid plan and the 1% COLA to discuss. That may shorten our time here.
Any board members have any issue with it not covering the 1.6 plan and just covering the 1% last pure DB plan with the 1% guaranteed COLA? And then he can reference as he wants to the other plans that are still over there.
I guess I'm having a hard time recalling, based on the email notice I got, why we're here to start with.
May I, Mr. Chairman? I asked that we have this called meeting, and I'd be happy to describe my thought and how we got here. Would that be
The chairman called, you called the meeting?
Right.
Okay.
would it be good for me to explain my thought processes and how we got here? Or why I requested it?
I'd like to know why we're here, yeah.
I will explain. After the December meeting, as I cogitated on the things that had happened, I realized at that point that the board was wanting to severely restrict or limit the benefits for future employees. But then I got to thinking that as we voted, our administration came here with only one recommendation, one methodology of getting there, and had not aggressively at all sought out a second methodology. So I called, early in January, I called Ray and said, I'd like to get Ed to run some numbers for me, trying to replicate the hybrid plan and the specifications of the hybrid plan. I actually talked to him about two, and neither one of those, and the 1.6 is one of them, neither one of them were acceptable to me. The main thing was the money per year that would be going to the retirees. I just couldn't get it to work out. The hybrid, I'll just tell you, was by far better than the other two things that I had looked at. So, having done that, I talked to Ray on a Thursday or Friday. I talked to Ed on Monday, told him what I wanted. On Friday of that week, I still hadn't heard from Ed, so I called Ray and said, did you talk to him? I talked to him, and I thought he was going to get back quickly. Didn't. Took a while longer to get back. And when I did get the second one back, it was not good. And I just thought that, well, I'm not going to be able to come up with a second methodology to get there. Then we received from the director this in the mail, email. Y'all remember this particular document? Well, when I was so disheartened I didn't look at it the first day, but I looked at it the second day. And then as I started to look at it, I'd point you to line E and line M. And what I found was a 1% COLA plan that is exactly like Tier 4, with the exception that the reductions are only in the COLA and the compound. And when I got to looking at what Ed had done here on comparing E to M, that's the hybrid to the 1% COLA pure DB plan, the projected funded ratio is better under the pure DB plan than the projected in the Tier 5 hybrid. Then I look at the second metric, and that's the projected fund ratio in 2054. The pure DB is still better than the hybrid. Then I look at the cash flow, and the cash flow is better. So we got three metrics right there. And he happened to put in $100 million down there because that's what's been talked about. And in two out of those, just out of the six metrics, 5 out of the 6, the DB plan was better. So over the weekend, I looked at that, so I immediately called Ray, and I said, Ray, we've never seen this before. Where did this come from? He told me where it came from, who requested it, and I said, that pure DB plan is better. Why don't we look at that? And I said, we need to have a meeting so that the board can see that and discuss that and look at it to see if that is something that we should endorse as well. So I did. I called him, asked him to have a meeting. I ended up talking with him. I talked with the chairman. I can't remember precisely what day it was on. I think it was on a Tuesday, like last Tuesday. And I had told him that we needed to meet quickly because I knew that the legislature was going to be working quickly and they were going to be coming out with bills. And if we were going to do anything quickly, I felt like that we should do it. And now I've heard here this morning that we could call an electronic meeting tomorrow. Well, that was on a Tuesday. And it took all the way, that was Tuesday of last week, it took all the way till today for us to get a meeting. Now, I don't know whether it was trying to get Ed here on the phone or other logistics or that sort of thing, but now I just kind of piqued my interest a little bit about that. So looking at this is the reason that we're here. Now, I've got some more explanation to go, but that's the reason that I wanted the meeting called.
Okay.
For the credit or discredit, depending on your perspective of why it's taken so long, is the chairman. So, and the legislature is in session, and I do have a full-time job. Without that full-time job, I don't have this job. So, and I just peeled away from Legislative Budget Office, asked me questions before I came over here. So, and I'm sure I'm gonna get some more while I'm sitting in here. So we're gonna make it fit, but it's not a good time of a year for me, so my apologies for the delay.
I certainly understand that.
All right.
Let me ask, what are we trying to get? Are we trying to say that 20 years from now, whichever plan we approve, it will make the overall PER plan more solvent and better off than we see it going to be in the near future? Is that where we're trying to go?
If you're asking me, the answer to that is yes. And I think that the board has already spoken that they want to severely reduce the benefits. And it's my thought that there is two methodologies that you can get to the same point. And we were only presented with one. And I was trying to find that second methodology. And when I see this page that I have not seen before, then all of a sudden, it looks like that's it, the second methodology to get there. And I wanted us to discuss that second methodology because I thought, Commissioner, that we as a board would not be doing our job if we didn't provide the decision maker with options if there are options.
So you're saying that what you're proposing will get us where we're trying to go, that is a betterment of the program down the road, but with less cutting of benefits? Is that what you're saying?
I think, let me explain the whole thing, and then you can, I think that'll answer that if you do that. And Ray or Chairman, whichever way you want to go, I can short circuit and kind of get to that 1% thing, because we already know what the hybrid does. It's already been voted and approved or endorsed by the board. So the only one that really I want us to look at is that 1%, pure DB. So I can give you the rest of my thoughts right now, if you'd like to do that.
Board have a preference?
Well, I sure want to hear him out.
Well, I think you're gonna do that one way or another.
I
So
thought
you're going out on a limb on my part, but I'm pretty sure that's not gonna be a problem. Just a question of whether you want Ed to weigh in first, or you'd rather than just cameo basically in on it, and I don't have a preference.
Well,
So,
can I involve Ed in the conversation?
absolutely,
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned.
I'd like to ask Ed if on that sheet that's entitled Mississippi PERS Actuarial Metrics for several legislative changes, if those numbers are correct and have not changed since we received that, and if they have changed, what numbers changed in his calculations to do so?
This is Ed Coble with CABMAC. No, those numbers have not changed. We've been running projections through the modeler and through our actuarial software for these tiers for quite a number of months here, and we've been consistent with the numbers that we've provided. We put them in this format. These same numbers can be found in the PowerPoint presentation that you have in front of you as well. So yes, these numbers are accurate.
So with that being said, then what I read here is right, showing for these numbers. Now, I will go ahead and give both plans the benefit of the doubt. And I would say we're talking 20 and 30 years out. And I'm going to say, as close as these numbers are, they may be in the margin of error, okay? And I don't know that, but I would say that. So if in your slide deck, if you would turn, no, they don't have pages numbers. I don't see them on there. But if you would look in the slide deck, I think it's the 3rd page. And if you would look at the Pure DB 1% COLA, it is my understanding that the 1% COLA was requested, and it is exactly like the Tier 4 now, with the exception of the COLA. The COLA would go from 3% to 1%, and a compound would go to 1%. Now, when I ran the numbers, the first time I ran them, I sent them to Bill. Bill's much better. He's a county Chancery clerk. He does Excel stuff, and he checked them for me, and I had made a fatal flaw. So that was on one of the first ones, and I just threw it away. So I took the numbers that came to us on the first time in the calculations, and what if in the, do you understand what I'm saying right now about the benefits? The benefits are exactly the same.
Right.
Okay. And yesterday at the Rules Committee, I think I heard that that the sick leave and military leave that is excluded in what we have would probably be included. Senator, am I that may be something that y'all want to look at putting back in?
Specifically, military leave was discussed. The other items are still under evaluation.
Okay. Well, and if those are put back in there, that's going to change the hybrid numbers, because that's something that's the military leave. It's leave. It is years that we're not reimbursed for. We're not paid for. So looking at the, y'all, I've got so many of these blue sheets here that it's hard. But I ran Excel spreadsheet. Bottom line, if 5% return, 5% return for the hybrid, they'd be getting about $45,000 a year.
Why'd you do 5 and not 7?
I got 7 right here. Let's talk about 7. Because the first sheet I got was only calculated on 5, and then it's 7 here as well. So 7%, it's going to be $50,000 a year for the hybrid. That's what they're going to get. Under the DB plan, that 1%, if you run the same numbers, it's going to be $52,620 starting off per year, and compounding at the end, it'll be up to 60,000. I think that number is a little different from one that I've last seen that Ed had done. But bottom line is, under the DB plan, the employees would be getting about $130,000 over a 20-year lifetime more than the hybrid plan. So that's close. I mean, I admit that it's close. So with that, with the money that the employees are going to be getting, there are some significant differences, and I think the differences would be if it's the years that you have to work before you retire. That's a serious one, in my opinion. In the DB plan here, unreduced retirement is at 30 years or 65 and 8. Under the hybrid plan, you got to work to 62 and 30. I'll give you an example. If a young person graduates from college, starts to work when they're 21, 22, 30 years later, 52 years of age, they can't retire. They got to work 10 more years.
What has the most bearing on your proposal? The factor dealing with the years worked as opposed to the factor dealing with the cost of living, 3% versus 1%, which is greater?
I don't know that I follow your question.
All right, you're saying it's gonna change the year that they have to work under your proposal.
No, that's, the tiers is, what I'm saying, the 1%, that's exactly what the tier 4 is today. It's exactly the same. Under the hybrid, you're gonna have to work to age 62 and have 30 years to get full retirement.
Yeah, I
You're
follow
gonna have to
you.
do that.
I follow you.
Now, so that led me to this question. If this 1% plan is within the margin of error of the hybrid plan, and if it's closer, then the question is, which of the 4 qualifiers that was in the motion that was made last month, which part does the DB plan not satisfy? Now, I talked to Ed about this, and if in that new deck of materials, you can see on page 4, I guess it's the next page over there, that the replacement ratio in a hybrid plan is 76.6%, and the replacement plan for the defined benefit is 87%. That's pretty significant more. Then if you look at in the first qualifier in the motion that was made, it says that the estimated and it is estimated and projected to have a favorable impact on the future funded status of the plan by lowering the cost of future benefits. Let's see.
Dr. McCoy? Dr. McCoy?
Yes.
May I insert and mitigating contribution risk
Yes.
from the minutes?
I'm gonna do what now?
And mitigating contribution risk.
Yeah, that's my number 4. That's my
Okay.
number 4.
Sorry to
there.
jump ahead.
Okay. So if we look at the funded ratio, the 40-year projection of funded ratio on page 12 and 13, it looks like that, with the going up. If you look at that, and you look at the pure DB and the hybrid plan, you can see that the funded ratio both trend upward. So that means it's going to have a favorable impact on the funding of the system. If you look at the unfunded liabilities, the next page, that's going to be going down. So both of those satisfy that qualifier. In directing a larger share toward the UAAL, and I don't know what page that's on, y'all. But under the, let's see,
I think it's going to be slide 9 if it's the share
yeah,
going to
I see
the.
it there, slide 9. If you look at that, and we're comparing this against, it looks like that now. That's slide 9. The current tier, the normal cost is 12%. The State-sponsored hybrid is 5. So that means that the normal cost is going down, and that means that a larger percentage can go toward the UAAL, which it is, 18.6%. And if you look down at the last line, it goes from 12% to 10%, and 18.59% goes toward the UAAL. I'd say that's within the margin of error, one way or the other. So I think that one is satisfied. Paying off the UAAL sooner. Well, you got more money going, so we're going to pay it off sooner than if we just stayed as we are. We certainly would. And then number 4, mitigating the contribution rate by lowering the future actuarial determined contribution. If you'll look on page or slide 13, you'll see that the projection of ADC, the pure DB is that kind of orange. That's 1%. The hybrid is just above it, and they drop to the floor at the same, almost exactly the same time. So all 4 of the qualifiers in the motion that we made last time and approved, this DB plan does the same thing. And it would give the decision makers another thing to consider, because I think that we as a board, it's our responsibility to share with the people of the state of Mississippi that there is more than one methodology to get there. It's not just a hybrid. And the hybrid, of course, 5% of that is going to be directed by the employee. The other is certainly a defined benefit. And I just do think that there is a comparable DB plan that can get us to practically the same within 3 years of paying off the UAAL. And I think that's within the margin of error. So I don't know why the board would not endorse the DB plan that did these things. It meets all the qualifiers of the motion. And that's really what I wanted to share, that when I got this page and it showed 5 out of the 6 metrics, the DB was better, I thought, well, somebody has figured out a pretty simplistic way to get there. So now that's the reason I wanted to have the meeting, so that we could give the decision makers. And since we're no longer the decision makers, we don't have any authority. We only make recommendations. If somebody in the legislature were to stand up and say, well, what DB plan would kind of get us there? Well, there wasn't one. Well, whose fault is that? It was this board and this administration's for not pushing to see what one would look like. Now you've got 2 and you can decide. Now, they both are probably ethical, and there's probably no 100% right or wrong, but I have my preference, and you have your preference. But I think that we need to endorse a DB plan as another methodology of getting to the same point. And that would take this board off the hook. Because right now, yesterday, Senator Sparks, who did a wonderful job, I watched him as he gave the presentation to the Rules Committee. He held up a piece of paper and said, now this is the unofficial minutes right here. And when they're voted on, they're approved, the board has endorsed this hybrid plan. Y'all, the reason I called on Tuesday of last week wanting a quick meeting, and the director just told us a minute ago when we passed the minutes today that we could have an electronic meeting tomorrow. It took from last Tuesday to today to get a meeting And the legislature may have had two options. It's their decision. If they choose the hybrid, then that's what they have chosen. But as a board, we have endorsed two options that can get us there. Now, that is why we're here, and what I was trying to get to is we have had this come to us, and I think it clearly demonstrates it. If you look through the pack, probably do a better job of explaining it than I would. Ed, please correct me, anything that I've said that's incorrect actuarially.
No, nothing. You've said, you've quoted all the numbers that are in the presentation. Fine. The only thing I'd point out is, on slide 10 and 11 with the funded ratios is, the hybrid plan, and all of these plans obviously get better funded once all the current members are kind of moved on retiree status, and most of them have passed. So you see a really significant increase in those on slide 11, those last 10 years for all of the plans, because of the new tier is most prevalent at that point. So, in 2054, the 1% COLA Tier DB plan is better funded. But as you can see in the graph, the hybrid plan does take over. And again, that's the 1% COLA, or we're running the hybrid plan with no guaranteed COLA at all. So that's the ability to kind of impact the cash flow, or have a responsibility of the cash flow and control it in those later years. But yeah, everything you said is accurate. This is this Pure DB plan with a 1% COLA, pretty straight on with current Tier 4, except the only difference is a 1% COLA versus the 3% COLA. And keeping the employee rate at 9% does help. I think we've looked at this plan in the past with a 7% employee contribution rate, and it didn't look as good. But keeping that employee contribution rate at 9% is the key to helping the funding of the plan. So it would just be a new tier that would look very similar to the current tier, except those new employees after a certain date would only get a 1% COLA.
And Ed, this is Chris Graham. The 1% is a guaranteed, the way it's run. It doesn't vary based on results or financial status of the system or changing circumstances.
Yep, it is a fixed 1%. It's still simple COLA up until age 60, and then compounding thereafter. But it's 1% fixed, guaranteed cost of living adjustment.
And in the hybrid version, you're not saying that there would never be a cost of living increase awarded at some point in the future, which I think I think you would be talking about. Did you say 30 years is what I forget what the number was, 30 years before you would most likely have, I guess you could hit 65 and 8 is maybe what it says, but you're really talking about sometime in the future before you're talking about doing any kind of raises or cost of living adjustments?
Right, yeah, there's we've run everything with currently no COLAs in the future for this group of members. But again, I think the way it's written is that it could be available, COLAs could be available and approved by the board or legislature, kind of to be determined is kind of what I wrote there.
From a
that would be an
financial
additional
standpoint.
cost.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
From a financial standpoint, which one involves more risk, the guaranteed COLA or the ad hoc type COLA?
Well, yeah, the 1% obviously has more risk. embedded in it because that's fixed in statute, that can't be changed. Whereas, if the funding gets better, the board or the legislature can certainly provide cost of living adjustments to members. It's done for many states across the country where the legislature decides to give a 13th check to retirees when the funding gets better, or grants, some compounding COLAs at their discretion. But definitely less risk there when it's controlled and voted on an annual basis.
What about, you said the funded ratio really changed, the trajectory changes. What year did you say that was? Between I guess, did you call it the 1% plan, Dr. McCoy? Is that what he called it, the 1% plan?
Yes, sir, I think at the bottom,
1%.
1% guaranteed COLA or something like
So the pure DB plan, 1% COLA is the one, that's an orange line on the funded ratio? And you said,
The graph on slide 11, there's a lot of lines, so it's hard to see. But basically, the orange is winning, if you will, is the higher line there. But and then the gray, kind of the grayish line is the hybrid line. You can see the trajectory that entails after 2054. It significantly improves. The slope of that line is much higher trajectory, and that's why it's basically 100% funded in 40 years. If that new tier, so the trajectory of that funded ratio is better because, again, you're able to control. Or there's no cost of living adjustment in there. So the cash flow is going to be significantly improved in those later years.
Now, in real dollars, Ed, did you run any numbers to say approximately what the compounding would be per year? I did. It's about $3 per year. It's a little more than $3 per year. In other words, the interest, the first year would be about $346. And then when you compound that every year, it goes up about $3.50 or something like that per year. Because, it is significantly less. And that is a huge and drastic change in benefits from the 3 and 3. Huge. Now, Ed, another question from me. It was brought up about the ADEC projections. So if you're following the actuarial standards and you bring us the funding ADEC that should be coming from the legislature, won't those continue to climb every year until about the year 2046 or 47?
Yes. There's two graphs in the back of my presentation on 13 and 14 that basically show the trajectory of the actually determined contribution rate. The first one on slide 13 is if the funding, the contributions are kept at the current statutory rates, with it increasing to the 19.9%. So just based on that the ADEC that we would calculate as the actuary would continue to grow. But the drop off there in 2047 is due to the funding policy. It's basically saying, because we're doing those layered amortization approach, that we would hopefully pay off the first base that was set up 20 some odd years or 2 years ago would kind of be paid off. But you can see in the first graph that it still doesn't. Even though it goes down, we still stay at a 25% ADEC. If the legislature adopts the same methodology that the board has adopted now to go to the ADEC payment method, then you can see on slide 14 that the majority of these plans, I think we recommended it go to 25.94% this year, that we would kind of hover in that area over the next 20 or so years. And actually, it goes up over the next years. And then for the hybrid plan, it pretty much stays flat. And it's under 28%. So, you get annoyed by me coming and telling you your ADEC goes up. If that approach is put into place, we won't be coming and asking for significant increases. Again, with most of these plans, but you can see on slide 14, the best one here is the hybrid plan. The pure DB 1% isn't too far off. It's only about a 1 to 2% higher ADEC. So still much better than looking at 32, 33% based on the current plan.
So, for my comments now is that I think that there is a definite choice to be made here. I think there is the choice of the hybrid plan that gets us out there at about 30 years, close to having it paid off. There's a choice between the DB plan that'll do essentially the same thing within the margin of error. I mean, we're talking about 30 and 40 years, with the assumptions that we've made. I'm going to say that they're both close within the margin of error of one another. There may not be one that is absolutely right or absolutely wrong, but there are some decisions that have to be made. But I don't think those decisions are the board's. I think the board ought to endorse two methodologies of getting to the point. One is a DB that has been shown today, and then the other is the hybrid that was approved in the December meeting, or the framework, let me say, was approved. The framework is met by the DB plan, and once we have two frameworks that'll get you there, then it is the legislature's decision as to whether to put 55% of the risk, shift that to the employee when they do the hybrid plan, or leave that risk more with the state. I mean, that's the choice. But I don't think that's our choice. I think what it is for us is to show two methodologies to get there. And that's what I want to recommend today, is there is another methodology that this board would endorse if the legislature chose to do that. Now, who does the legislature have to answer to? Not us, but they'll have to answer to the general public. They will have to answer to future employees. I just think we give them the options on our best knowledge. And today I've given you my best knowledge. And that's my explanation until we get ready to leave this topic. And when we do, I just happen to have a motion.
So on slide 13 and 14, which, my opinion, but arguably, we're sitting here because of, that rate, what would it be, Ed? Do you know, without the guaranteed 1% COLA, what that ADEC trajectory is? Instead of what looks like 5 percentage points more.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. What are you asking? What if it wasn't?
On,
The
on
pure DB plan without the 1% COLA?
in the ADEC, specifically the ADEC.
Specifically, what would the ADEC would be? I think we did that in the November meeting.
It would be lower than
I'm
1%,
just,
right?
yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. The November meeting, when we were looking at this plan exactly in November for the 1% COLA, we had a 7% employee contribution rate. So this is the first time we've run this option, or even the plan with no COLA, with a 9% employee contribution rate. So the numbers, don't have those numbers.
Okay.
Let me ask this.
But it would be lower, yes.
Lower than 45%. So what,
Because the board approved tier 5 from last year was at 9.58 normal cost. So if you left that at 9, the employer portion is only going to be 0.58. So you'd have to go. You'd have to
It would
go
be
down.
probably lower than it would be lower than the hybrid then, yeah.
Is this a moot point that we're discussing here? Because I heard you say that Senator Sparks presented our original recommendation that was sent over there before the committee. Is the horse already out of the barn?
Well, there's two horses that we're talking about, I think. Because this meeting did not occur before the Rules Committee, the first step has already taken place. And it has been passed out of the Rules Committee, is my understanding as I watched.
And so then why are we coming back with a second recommendation after it's already gone?
There are a lot of other legislators over there, and I don't know how they feel about a hybrid. I know how the Lieutenant Governor feels. I know how the Senator Sparks feels. He knows how I feel. I mean, we've got differing thoughts on that. But if another legislator wants to stand up and say, well, we can get there and not disrupt the whole PERS system like we have it right now by just changing to the 1% and 1% or a 0.5% and a 0.5% or whatever they choose, and still do a pure DB plan. They can still get there by doing that. Now that's the reason, is because I want to give the legislature, every person over there, the options that we know will work. They only had one. It was my opinion after the meeting last month, that it was by design and intention that we were going to leave here with only one option. That was my feeling. I don't have anything to base that on other than we only got one proposal and we didn't get any other.
So what you're saying, we're saying to the legislature, all right, our initial proposal went over there, and then you've talked about it. But if you want additional proposals and don't like that one, here's one you can consider.
However they want to interpret what we do. What we do is says there's two ways to get there. That's all I'm saying. There's two ways to get there. One is a hybrid, one is a DB. And both of them drastically reduce the benefits. And that, I'm already resigned to that fact. That, you do a 9-1 vote, I can get it, but I just think there's another way to get there and drastically reduce those benefits.
Is there any possibility of us sending two over there that it confuses the body and they do nothing?
All we have, I can't speak for them. I personally,
yeah, people who can.
I'll be glad to speak if I'm recognized, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I want to unpack a couple things because I think I understand your desire has been from the moment I first heard you pontificate on PERS is that you believe it should be a DB with a guaranteed COLA, and I respect that's your position, 100%. I've also tried to catch up with a lot of you who've been on this board for a long time on the actuarial reality of the plan. As it relates to another legislator standing up, you got 173 other choices than the guy sitting right here who could have dropped a bill for PERS this year, last year, and they didn't. My Senate colleague is not in his chair today. He's over there voting on bills. So I'm sorry, the only legislator standing up is sitting here with you. So I'd say that to start with. The DB, and I appreciate you use the word framework, DBDC framework. I tried to stress, and I hope that came across in the rules meeting, that it's endorsed if it impacts the system as stated in your plan. I'm really working hard, and I appreciate Ray and Devetta and others who've tried to answer questions, because we want a good product. We want a product that is building for the future. I do have a concern, and I am an attorney by trade, but I am not giving legal advice to this board. But I'm a little concerned with you saying that this board's intention is to severely reduce benefits. So I want to, for future employees, excuse me. And I want to ask Ed a question. I think it's been answered, but is the risk, Ed, is a pretty straightforward question. Is the risk greater under the pure DB 1% COLA or greater under the hybrid that we've been discussing?
Okay, I think we'll have to add one other thing. To whom is the risk assigned?
That's my second question,
Oh,
but
okay.
I just want to know his first answer.
Okay.
Yeah, there's more risk on the retirement system again for the 1% COLA.
And who is the retirement system?
How I look at it is with the employers.
No. Who are the people that are at risk if the checks don't go out? Members, retirees, and beneficiaries? I'm not trying to hide the ball. That's the language in the motion. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. The retirees, yeah.
Okay, so there's greater risk in the DB plan, and that risk is ultimately to the plan sponsor, the employers, that we would have to make payments, because that's the challenge we have today. We're 55.9% funded, but it's been my intention since the day I got elected that I intend to honor the commitment to all of these people, members, retirees, and beneficiaries. We got to pay. We got to figure it out one way or the other. My concern right now for this board is our discussion is to people you do not have a fiduciary duty to. You're referring to reducing benefits for future employees, and you, under the DB, based on what the actuary just said, are adding risk to the whole system, which could impact and would impact the existing members, retirees, and beneficiaries. And I can assure you, when I was running for this office, I had many PERS members, beneficiaries, and retirees who approached me and said, take care of our benefits, protect our benefits. That's exactly what I'm doing. Nobody has ever approached me and said, take care of unhired future state employees to our detriment. So I do want to be very fair. This board can adopt the proposal today. A great respect for you and your career and your desire to see a DB with a fixed COLA. But I do want to recognize the fiduciary duty is not to a future unhired employee. And under the numbers you've presented us, it appears in 2064, it is 10.5% less funded plan. Is that correct, Ed?
That's right. 96.6 versus 86.1.
Do you have the ability to tell me how many millions or billions of dollars 10.5% funding difference is?
Yeah, if you look on slide 12, and if you kind of follow the 2064 line up, there's the hybrid and the orange line. The pure DB plan is about at 15 billion unfunded, whereas the hybrid would be very close to zero.
So if you adopt this plan and all actuarial assumptions are met to perfection, we will have 15 billion fewer dollars to pay to the people we have a fiduciary duty to if we adopt the DB 1% guaranteed COLA plan.
Not necessarily. It's just the difference. The unfunded is the difference between the assets and the liabilities. So you can't say that it's $15 billion less in assets.
That's right.
The
And that's
liabilities
always,
will be different.
yeah, that's always the mystery, because when we tell people today it's 26.5 billion underfunded, I always try to remind people we didn't lose $26.5 billion in investments. That's
Right.
the spread,
Right.
the delta, if you will,
Yeah.
between fully funded and not fully funded. But under the proposed motion and the proposed plan presented today, even as far out as 2064, we would be 15 billion less to the good, away from fully funded under the proposal versus the prior proposal.
That's correct.
That is my concern, and I'm gonna go ahead and go a step further since we're talking about other things. I also got an ORP bill out of committee yesterday, and I really would appreciate if this board would adopt, either go back to the actuarially accumulated unfunded liability or net pension liability, because the amount of impact this board has on legislators is great, and it should be. And you could tell by the questions I received, if I walk over there with a endorsement from this board, it's very important, it's very valuable, to the extent that even the changing of terminology makes people uncomfortable. I want to be transparent, I want to be above board. But let's talk a minute about the ORP. This board recommended an ORP bill a year ago that capped ORP, and for future ORP participants, it would have a 9% hard cap. I have dropped a bill that reduces the ORP or increases the ORP contribution coming to the PERS by almost 8%. The reason I did that is because I think it is a program that may have been well intended, but in reality should have never been tied to the employer contribution rate, because the O stands for optional. Somebody walked into employment in the state of Mississippi, and the very first decision they made is, I don't want to be in PERS. I don't believe you have a fiduciary duty to somebody that's not in PERS. And that's a future employee, and that's somebody who said, I don't want your system. I don't want to be in your retirement. I want a defined contribution plan. And by the way, we're going to get the same contribution from the employer, and we're going to carve off 2.5% for the rest of the state employees. And you're going to match us at 15, 16, 17%. The people most wanting us to go to ADAC in the state of Mississippi are ORP recipients, because they would receive a 6% increase, 7%. So I would ask the board also, since based on the information I've been provided from PERS, every point of ORP I bring over to the PERS system for the UAAL is worth $5 million. So that's about $40 million immediately, and it would grow to over $100 million that would flow to the UAAL, because there's no new ORP, so those people would come join us in whatever Tier 5 looks like. But we would also be receiving more if we put a hard cap in. So again, as a fiduciary, and I'm not a voting member, I'm a liaison, I couldn't imagine not wanting to support a plan that potentially would immediately put $30+ million into the UAAL and maybe $100 million in the short future with no new tax dollars. So that may have not answered the question, but I'm concerned, and the board, at its pleasure, whatever it does, when I go over there, and I will say this to you, Dr. McCoy, if any board action is taken today, if there's a new plan endorsed, I will stand from the well and say, now, this is my bill. And this is one of the endorsements. There was also an endorsement of a DB, and that is not my bill, nor did anybody else drop that bill. And I'm going to make sure I get with Ed and have very factual numbers, and I'm going to say this other option that has been endorsed has these impacts. And so I'm, I leave it to the pleasure of the board as far as an endorsement. But if the board's going to endorse a plan that adds risk and gets us to fully funded in less time, I will share that along with the presentation.
Did you say that if somebody chooses not to be, a new employee chooses not to be involved in PERS, they have that opportunity? I didn't think that was possible.
If they are an ORP categoried person, and this is the fault of the legislature, let me be clear where the blame lies. 1990, the legislature carved out ORP, and for certain categories of IHL only employees, it's not a K-12 community college issue, this is the Institutes of Higher Learning, there was a plan called Optional Retirement Program, and they have the opportunity to say, I don't want to be in PERS. And unfortunately, no one stood up for years as the rate continued to climb. And I'm here to tell you, 15% match on a 9% contribution is the most generous I've ever heard of in a defined contribution plan. So I'm on team PERS. I'm on team let's pay down the UAAL. And you're right, there's more than one way to get there. And I promise you, I'm doing the best I can.
Don't doubt that at all, Senator. I would just point this out, at both of these plans put over 18% more toward the UAAL. And yes, but I'm going to say at 40 years, we're in the margin of error, out there, because none of this has any additional contributions. And if additional contributions come, these numbers are going to change over time, will change drastically, I believe, if there's additional, because I don't think any of these on this deck have any of the 100 million in there that's been talked about, do they, Ray?
The slide deck does not have the
Slide
100
deck
million
doesn't have
to
any
my
of that
knowledge.
computation in there. So again, as I said, I don't think there's an ethical issue here. It's a matter of opinion and what the individual thinks that is best for the system over time. And that's the point that I'm.
And while I appreciate that it's a matter of opinion, what's the best way to get there, it's not a matter of opinion that it's 10.5% less funded in 2064 on the numbers that are compared. And while I have no level of certainty which bills can be passed, I've already heard people don't like the ORP bill. I guess I wouldn't like it either if I was getting a haircut. So I respect that. But my responsibility, I believe, is to the retirees, the beneficiaries, and the existing members. And if it's 10.5% difference in 2064, I don't consider 15 billion my margin of error. So I'm just going to lay out the facts. I won't dodge anybody's question. The reason we were in 216 yesterday for rules, that's not the normal room for rules. I wanted it recorded, streamed, and archived so that people can see exactly what was said. And I've said this privately, I'll say it public, and I'll say it again. If I get outside of the bounds of your endorsement of that was voted on in December, I want somebody to tell me, because that is neither my intention and my goal. It's just to help secure the PERS system for the future.
I will say this, if you look at that same chart, it's 15 billion, that's 3 years. That's 3 years. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's 3 years. So that's the only point that I would make on that same chart there. I don't know that I have anything else to say on this point at all. At this point, I think I've explained why we're here, what I thought brought us here, what we needed to look at, and that, in my opinion, is we have another way to get there. In 2064, it's how much ever money the senator said, and on the chart, it's 3 years. You know, that's the additional 3 years. So, I just, that's all the, until we get to the point where we want to leave it. I do have a motion.
What? Board members? Senator Blunt?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for being late. The Senate is in session. I know Senator Sparks and I are always trying to balance, where we need to be when we need to be two places at the same time. I appreciate Senator Sparks. He and I have co-sponsored together 2 bills that the board has requested, and appreciate all his work and diligence in this. I was listening as I had the YouTube on my earphones before I walked over here from across the street. And I think I heard Commissioner Dale say, is this timely? Or as the horse left the barn? I would say the legislative session is about options. The legislative session is 90 days. This is a very important issue. The hybrid plan passed out of a Senate committee of 5 people with at least 2 no votes yesterday, and it's on the Senate calendar. But and I think that we haven't heard from the House on this. I don't know where the governor is on this. The Senate hasn't voted on this. There will be differences of opinion between people in both political parties on this, I think. There'll be differences of opinion, but certainly between the House and the Senate, there's always disagreements between the House and the Senate. And there's a lot of time left. I think the great resource of this board and the actuaries is to give us numbers that I hope that we can all agree on are accurate so we can make the best decisions. And I think the board has a fiduciary responsibility to its members. Senator Sparks and I have a responsibility to the state as a whole and taxpayers as a whole, as well as the members. And we need, I think, on any bill involving any subject, more information and more options are important. And so, because it may be that being funded at 86% in 40 years is good enough for some people, and it may not be good enough for other people. We got 174 people, and they all are accountable, and all need to be. They all need to be heard. They all have a right to be heard on something that's important as this to all of our constituencies and to the state budget. And I believe if we all agree on the numbers, then the hard decisions about that need to be across the street with the people who are elected. And everybody has the same vote, one vote. And so I just believe that more options are a good thing. Certainly the Senator Sparks said, and what the board thinks about any proposal is going to be very important to us and to anybody else over there. But the session is just getting started. And public awareness of this is only starting to build. This bill came out of a Senate committee, after about supper time last night, and there'll be more discussion, and there should be more discussion about it because it's very important. So that's all I have to say. I respect all of you and any decision that you make, and for providing this information to me and Senator Sparks, and we'll share it with the other members of the Senate. Thank you.
Senator Blunt, whenever people in your body vote against recommendations, do they have any?
The vote against the recommendations of the board?
Yes. What is their alternative? Do they offer them?
Well, I don't know that we've ever voted against the recommendations on the board of anything, on anything.
Said there were 2 votes against it yesterday.
I'm talking about the vote in the Senate Rules Committee yesterday. It's a 5-member committee.
Well, and to be fair, there's a voice vote. I don't know who voted yea or nay. Those are not recorded votes. I agree with Senator Blunt. There were no's. There was also a lot of discussion that unless I had book, chapter, and verse, it appeared to me to be, unless I had a book, chapter, and verse endorsement, of the exact language that was going to be concerned. That's how much respect they have for this board, which goes back to your other question, would a second recommendation muddy the water? Yes, in my opinion. If you want my opinion, yes. A second proposal now divides the body. They're going to know there's a DB option. But if this board chooses to speak through its vote and adopts a motion, I will share that. Again, I'm open as a book, sometimes to my own detriment, but that would be the pleasure of the board.
But I think that that's the way the legislature makes their sausage. It's through discussion. So, Mr. Chairman, if it's time for me to make a motion, I'd like to make a motion at this time.
Let's make sure we don't have any other questions from board members. Any other comments from board members? Mr. Yarbrough, do you have any questions, comments?
No questions, no comments.
Okay. Mr. Higgins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was going to share a few things. I certainly want to defer to you or any other board members if they want to talk first. Just go ahead now. Just to share a few things on what I was on some of the things I've said or that have been said. To the risk, just as a reminder and background and some of it to Commissioner Dale's question earlier and for some of the others. As you know, a DB, the risk is borne by the plan and the state and the settler. A DC, the risk is borne by the participant. And the hybrid, of course, has a little bit in the middle. That's why it's called a hybrid, where you have the DB component and the DC component. And so I wanted to just share that in the context of what we were talking about earlier, especially when it comes to the comments about it looks the same or it's equal, which it is financially. And by the way, this is Dr. McCoy's forum and of course the board meeting today. So this is really just more for information. But that projection is based on all those assumptions being met. So to put that in reality, if for some reason they're not, then on a pure DB, that risk is to the plan. Some of this has already been covered in some manner. And then on a DC or a hybrid, that's less risk. And we'll share that briefly to go into a little bit about some of the comments and looking at different options and to December. Because they're really, in somewhat, it's hard to get the exact same type thing. You can match up certain and key financial metrics, but they're different because of the risk component. The hybrid has less risk, as Senator Sparks and others have talked about. As you know, we have looked at many options over the months and years coming up to, I'll just comment briefly about October and November, which had different components. And the reason December was the way it was because at that point, and this is kind of key back to the motion that's been talked about, the reason that particular one was presented in December is because there was interest expressed in the state potentially pursuing a hybrid model, and they wanted to know what the board thought about it. So that's why that one was the one there. They were interested in that as we understood it, and they wanted to see if the board would approve it or endorse it. Of course, as you know, we had multiple options leading up to that, and including, I think, that same type hybrid in November. And then it was framed as if the state wants to do this, then of course, y'all know the motion, so I won't repeat it, but it basically was if the state wanted to pursue that model and if that model is projected to help better sustain the plan for future benefits, future members and retirees and so on and so forth in that motion. I don't think that's the board necessarily wanting to reduce benefits or saying they wanted to cut benefits. They were just trying to do the fiduciary duty. And a few other things I could mention, but I'll pause for now.
I would say that I would answer one of the comments says that the state wants to do this. I think I'd clarify that and say the lieutenant governor wants to do this. I've not heard from the Speaker of the House. I've not heard from anybody on that section over there. I've not heard from I've not heard from my senator yet about that. So I don't know if the state, if we're saying the lieutenant governor is the state or if the legislature is the state. So I think it's the legislature, and I think we need to give them the options. And then the state speaks through the vote of the legislature. That's the way it works. just like this board speaks through its minutes here. So that's the way I would frame that a little bit differently. But when this motion was when the conversations that went on between the director and some of our board members and the lieutenant governor, it was shared with me that what the lieutenant governor wanted was that we would not oppose that bill if they put in a hybrid, that we would not oppose it. Well, I'm still, in the motion I'm about to make, I'm still not opposing it. But when the motion came to us, it said that we would endorse it. And you heard me say at that time, if I've not seen a bill, I don't know how I can endorse it. I don't know how I can do that. And I didn't. I voted against it. Well, then, as I read all of this, then I tried to get in my mind that we were looking at a framework, and then, oh, shoot, the DB meets all that framework. So that's just all that I would say concerning that as well.
And I guess I wouldn't say the lieutenant governor is the state, necessarily, in my opinion. It is more of a collective group. I guess from my perspective, though, it doesn't matter who it is if they're in a position to influence it. And again, this board is the same way. It can keep things from happening a lot faster than it can make things happen. That's just the nature of how it works. So if I were in the legislature, and I'm being very presumptuous, my apologies, if I were in a position to be able to do something, I could kill a bill faster than I could get it through. I mean, that's just a fact. There's no way around that. And I hadn't even done this that long, really, in relative terms. So I think that's more of the care to be taken. And what may be recommended is not to get to where all of a sudden we've got nothing. There's nothing except a 47% ADEC trajectory. Again, why we're here right now is that ADEC, that employer contribution rate is the kindling. That's it. And so my personal opinion is that a guaranteed COLA for some key folks in the legislature is not going to work for them. It may, though, for others. I don't know. But from my standpoint, guaranteed COLA is not as good as an optional COLA because of the risk and because of our responsibility, which is to these people right now, today. And every time I've talked to somebody generally about this to mention it, they usually lean back to go, what about me? And I say, well, this helps insure it. Not that this plan doesn't either, or not to say it doesn't. But that type of thing, if there's a will to do it at the legislative level, then it's almost like it can't fail. I mean, in my mind, if it does, it's time for funding. There's nothing left. We're, as far as I know, and I hope somebody's got better ideas than I do, but at this point, based on the promises the legislature made last year that I remember, I didn't count them all, but they were pretty comprehensive. Not going to change benefits, and I appreciate and respect that. You don't have that, and you don't have some instruction to Ed Coble to say, stop penciling this into the estimates going forward. You got 47%. And that may be a low number based on what my experience on this board has been at meeting projections that we have. 47 could be 57. We have a 0% return year this year. 57, again, me just throwing numbers out, but 47 I'm not throwing out, I don't think. Make sure that's right, Ed. 45, 47. That's the number that the ADEC's going to be, projected to be, under that plan. It's going to be 43 under the hybrid. So either way, it's going to be projected to keep going really out of sight, in my opinion, and out of the realm of what is practical in this state, in the poorest state in the nation, probably, or at least down in the bottom decile. So I think for me, with a guaranteed COLA, I'm probably gonna, you know how I'm probably gonna go, but again, you've heard from legislative liaisons and leaders here, their opinion. And so, anybody else got any comments?
A motion has been made. Have we in the discussion area now?
Not yet, but we could do that.
Ready for my motion?
Does anyone have a motion?
I have a motion.
Oh, you do?
Don't recognize it.
My motion is going to read exactly as the same as the motion that was made in December with the substitution of, and I'll give you this after the meeting. If the state, as the plan sponsor with the ultimate responsibility for plan design, proposes a PERS Tier 5 defined benefit model for future employees as explained by staff and actuaries in the February special meeting, 2025 board meeting, that is estimated and projected to have a favorable impact on the future funded status of the plan by lowering the cost of future benefits, which it does, the DB, directing a larger share of employer contribution toward the unfunded actual accrued liability, UAAL, which it does, and we want to change that language eventually, I understand.
Well, we're about to get there, actually.
Okay.
And it's okay for this.
Paying off the UAAL sooner, and it does, and mitigating the contribution rate risk by lowering the future projected actuarial determined contributions and thereby better sustaining PERS and maintaining the fiscal integrity of the plan for existing members, retirees, and beneficiaries. I move that the PERS board endorse such a Tier 5 proposal.
Do you mind going back to that Tier 5 proposal and reading that portion one more time about what proposal?
If that if the plan sponsor proposes a PERS Tier 5 defined benefit model for future employees. Can we keep going?
No, I just want to make sure I correct.
Yeah, no. What this does is mirrors the other proposal. We've got a hybrid that the board has endorsed. It will get us there. This motion is for DB, which will also get us there 3 years difference. You know, in some 10, 15 million or billion, 15 billion, yeah.
If you're talking about 3 year, I'm sorry, we have a
That's the
motion, I'm sorry.
We have a motion.
Sorry.
I'll second it so we can have some discussion. We have a second. Is there discussion?
So your motion is really related to your 1.0% guaranteed COLA plan? That's what you're saying, because you used years,
That's
how
what
many years?
I'm saying that there is another method to be here, and right now, that's the one that we have. The legislature could change that, but there is a DB method where we can get there.
Okay.
But my feeling is this, initially, when you raised this question, that we're giving them alternatives. And I like alternatives to be given. And I was prepared to vote for that, your alternative. But in hearing the good senator say that by doing this at this time, it would further muddy the water over there and would confuse some. And when that happens, sometimes nothing happens. And I don't think we can have nothing to happen. So I would probably oppose your bill.
If I may follow up just to see whether I can stay in hot water or get back in cooler water. Senator Sparks, I don't know, from what Commissioner Dale just said, that sounded like now at this point, but I don't know that this point wasn't a week ago too, what you said applied to.
Yeah, let me be fair.
Okay.
The drop day for a bill was 2 weeks ago. If somebody runs a bill out of this magnitude at that late of an hour, it would have a hard time Uh, But it certainly has no bearing on when this meeting was called, because I um, don't think that's a new thing to us, is that there's support for a DB with a guaranteed COLA by Dr. McCoy. I think he's been very clear from day one on that.
And is that specific in the bill? I probably should know the answer to this, but that, right now, the bill's still in a state of being.
That's correct. And of course, if it was perfectly written, it still has an opportunity to be amended at the floor. It's got to go to the House. If it passes off our floor, the bill may end up in conference. There's no question that everything being done today will be taken into consideration as we work on the legislation. But if there are two endorsements, particularly of two different styles of framework, and if we're going to endorse a DB that has been described here today, then just say it's a DB with a guaranteed COLA of 1%, because otherwise, and I'm just being honest, I could take that endorsement and go say, we're going to do a 2% DB, and that's going to help pay off the actuarial unfunded liability. And that would be within the framework of the endorsement. And I'm not here to play games. I'm here to try to do what's best for the PERS system. But I think based on what the actuaries have said, there is risk that is greater under this DB. And now you're going to have two endorsements. Are they referencing one another? You know, are we trying to pick the best of the two? Because I think that, again, Dr. McCoy believes that pathway is best. Other people believe another pathway may be better. But that's what people are going to want to do. They're going to want to compare the two plans, and all we're doing is endorsing framework. The 5 and 4 DBDC has been discussed at length, I think, to this body for maybe several years, or at least a year that I've been here.
I've been wrong plenty, but I would suspect there's going to be another time for this board to weigh in on some legislation that's not either one of these two things.
That's correct.
I mean, that's just the potential. So, okay, further discussion, questions? If not, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your hand. Terrence, I know you'll have to speak yours, but say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Those opposed? Right. Motion fails to carry.
Now,
Any?
excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I thought that, have you a transmittal document of what you sent over to the legislature? I thought that when we were looking at the list of things that we sent last year, that the ORP was one of those things on there that we said that we wanted to send again. And I did not go back and check the minutes after the hearing last, because I thought the consensus of the board was that we were going to resubmit that. Do you have a transmittal document that you can share with us of what you have transmitted to the legislature as part of our legislative program this year?
I don't know if I'd call it a transmittal document, but I could speak to all of that. As far as last year, I would say last year and how we communicated and placed things online and so on and so forth was a little bit of an outlier and unique due to all the circumstances. We did have an ORP proposal last year that was formally voted on and by the board and included. This year, as far as the formal votes, it was the MDC proposal from last year, the UAAL, which is now hopefully will be NPL, and we'll talk about in a minute, was endorsed again this year. We held off on a formal vote for the ORP this year, knowing that there was some research and other consideration going on within the legislature that they may have one. So there hasn't been a formal vote for the ORP package this year. Of course, the approval and the recommendation from last year is there. As far as the transmittal document on those things, I wouldn't call it that, but it's been relayed as needed and as typical as in the years past.
Well, last year we had a transmittal document. We listed everything that we sent over there. And I would suggest to you that we need a formal transmittal document so the board will know precisely what has gone over and what has been done every year. Because Chairman Breland and I were talking about, and we talked about something that was voted on last year, and Chairman said, well, if we voted on last year, it has not been rescinded. And I said, well, now, I think if it's a legislative program, I think that goes from year to year, and we just went on to something else. We didn't speak. So that's the reason that I think the legislative program ought to be a formal transmittal document, because I think, well, in my opinion, we need to have it. And now we're at a point where in the meeting yesterday, I think one of the members told him, well, if we don't have a formal document from the board, we're not even going to consider it. I mean, that was literally the language that I heard.
I think it was, and I was tasting my words so carefully because I do not want to represent something this board has not said, but I told them ORP legislation was dropped last year per the request of the board. It was a voted on proposal. It was to cap ORP where it currently was for existing ORP participants, and it was to allow ORP to continue with a 9% cap on any new ORP person. That was how I explained what the board had done the prior year, that the board had not spoken through their minutes formally to me that I was aware of on ORP, but it is a source of revenue for PERS that is generated because it's tied to the rising employer contribution rate. So I just told them I dropped this bill on my own. It's hard for me to believe the PERS board would not like to have more revenue, but yes, sir, it would greatly benefit me if that was a formal vote of the board. Or it greatly benefit the legislation. I don't know how well it benefits me.
And so to be clear, what you had asked for, requested we consider earlier, is 9% prospective for new members.
And I didn't drop that legislation.
Okay.
That's what y'all's
That was a
legislation
bit-
was
okay.
the year before. The legislation as dropped yesterday takes existing ORP members to 9%, the remainder coming to PERS 0.2 for administrative expense, and the balance, which you can do the math, 19.9, where we get to in about 2.5 years, minus 9 is 10.9, minus 0.2 is 10.7. That's 10.7% that will be coming to PERS, where now only 2.5% is coming to PERS, and each of those points is worth about $5 million, is my rough calculations in consultation.
And that's existing members, and new members go under whatever Tier 5 passes.
That would be correct. New members, there would be no new ORP participants going forward, and there is without question a value to that number if they are coming into any new Tier 5, which would be greater than the 10% or so that's coming from the existing members. And it's those are hard conversations. I've had those with some of our friends at IHL. I'm sure I will get to have more of them, but it's hard for me to sit in these meetings looking at the billions of dollars we have in unfunded actuarial liability and continuing to see that number go up and be attached. It's just not fair. It's beyond unfair.
So from the standpoint, my standpoint, at least in here, I wouldn't be comfortable without some deliberation on that. Now,
Certainly.
if we're talking about the old bill from last year and resurrected it and saying, I think I'm more comfortable, but I'll lean on board members to say what. But I think that may take a little more time. We do have a board meeting around the corner, but, well, again, we could call a special board meeting within a week or so. Sorry, Dr. McCoy.
Or an hour,
Trying
or
to-
tomorrow.
Well,
Yeah.
it depends on the subject. So if it's minutes, I'm more comfortable than a new DB plan.
I just wanted to make the board aware that this package of bills, two that are without question recommended by the PERS board multi-year, the ORP principle of more money going to the UAAL have all been endorsed in the past, language provided, and a Tier 5 hybrid has been endorsed based on the names of the motion. What I'm trying to be clear to legislators is I'm not over there with anything that is of my own volition that has not in some way been vetted, endorsed, approved, or encouraged by the board. And I want to be fair with that.
Sure, and appreciate that. And as Dr. McCoy and others have mentioned, appreciate yours and other people and to work towards that. And of course, appreciate the respect and consideration of the board and its approval or disapproval of whatever may be in front of them that relates to legislation. But I can talk with Ray, we'll see what, and get with you to see if we need to put that before the board, and the board can make a decision on it or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then, but we do have one that I think in other, which is, and nobody has anything else for Tier 5 discussion. In the other section, Ray's got something. I know Senator Sparks will have some input directly on it because they were both in the meeting, that Senator DeBar brought up as what sounded like semantics somewhat, but again, he's trying to not, he doesn't want to get sideways with something that technically the board didn't, by the letter, sign off on by majority. So do you mind explaining that?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for that. Some of the comments that I was going to cover in one way or the other have been touched on, so I'll try to be brief and try not to be too repetitive. But as many of you know, and for those who don't or may not be following us closely, yesterday was a committee deadline, so a lot of bills died at that phase, and that involve PERS, and we'll give you an update. We're tracking that, and of course, we'll give you an update as needed or requested or at the proper time, and certainly at the upcoming regularly scheduled February meeting as far as the bills that are still alive. As far as the ones of PERS most interest, as previously indicated in some cases, the MDC bill passed out of the Rules Committee. The UAAL payoff if you leave PERS type bill that we'll talk about in just a minute passed out with a slight modification to add, I think it's called a reverse repealer just due to the terminology type thing, and I'll come back and talk more about that in just a second. An ORP bill that is similar in concept that Senator Sparks has already referenced moved along, and if I'm incorrect on any of this, please let me know. And then the bill by Senator Sparks that will be the Tier 5 bill and also proposes to close SLRP to future members moved out. And just so you know, because there was some of the conversation earlier, terminology from Commissioner Dale and others, it moved out, but it's still basically in the carry forward manner. It just moved the code sections forward. And I think there was a committee sub, but I believe all that did. I don't think it made any major changes other than add, I believe, the SLRP code sections.
That's correct. I actually didn't mention that. I didn't ask for a recommendation, and I'm not going to put you in that box, but the bill that has a fifth tier, I also have moved to end the supplemental legislative retirement program in its totality for any newly elected officials treated the same way as Tier 4 would be moving to Tier 5.
So that when you see the sub, that's that. So that takes care of the MDC bill, the pay off the unfunded bill, Tier 5, and ORP. As far as as you've already mentioned, I was going to say yesterday there definitely seemed to be certainly an awareness and sensitivity to what the board had approved or not, more so than in the past. So I won't spend as much time as I was going to on that. That's already been covered. But as a part of that had to do with terminology. And to go ahead and explain what that is, what I had requested is just a very minor, slight terminology change, difference between UAAL and NPL. And in the background on that, first of all, let me explain the differences in the numbers. They're very similar numbers going in the same direction. You could say one is more actuarial, the other one's more auditing, perhaps. The primary reason behind it is in researching this and answering questions, getting more details now that this bill is actually starting to move as opposed to last year, and researching it further, it just seemed, and what I found was it'd be more appropriate to use NPL. Now and the primary reason for that is the reports that we already do now. the reports that we do now to where employers can view and see their proportionate share of the net pension liabilities done each year, combined between actuarial work and auditing work, and it's an audit report done by the auditors. It refers to net pension liability and collective net pension liability. So it seemed more appropriate to use NPL instead of UAAL. So that's all it is in a nutshell. Very minor wording change because that's the report that employers already use, and are already using to put on their books. Now, a little bit more background as to the difference in the numbers. It's the asset number. The liabilities are the same in either way. On the NPL, they use the actual asset number or net position. On the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, they use the actuarial assets, which takes into account the 5-year smoothing. So that's basically a full type background. Ed's on the phone. He's familiar with that. He's familiar with our discussions that I was having with the auditors and actuaries, which brought about this. But to just sum up, very minor administrative housekeeping type change. That's the explanation behind it. But if you agree, would like a recommendation to support changing the terminology from UAAL to NPL.
Okay, changing the terminology, you said it was a minor change. We did an actuarial change, and it created great consternation in the legislature when we changed from 7.5% to 7% on the, now, how is that changing? You said it's going to change the numbers. How's it going to change it? Is it going to make it look worse, or is it going to make it look better? Which is it going to do?
In a material sense, it's a very minor difference, or I should say this.
You've already said that. Is it going to make it look better, or is it going to make it look worse?
Sure. Well, I tell you what, if you, Ed, do you happen to have those numbers? I want to say from memory, well, I tell you what, if you give me a minute, I'll look it up. Give me just a second. Melanie, if you would, go ahead, Ed.
So again, the
25 billion in my memory.
number.
What, Ed?
Yeah, the NPL number, can you hear me?
Barely, you're kind of cutting out a little bit.
Okay, sorry. The NPL number, let me take you off speaker. The NPL number is the difference between the actuarial accrued liability and the fiduciary net position, or market value of assets in another term. So it's the value of the assets as of June 30th. So those fluctuate from year to year. We could have a great year like we did a couple years ago. We could have a bad year. So there is a little bit of fluctuation, a little bit more volatility in those numbers. Again, I don't have those numbers in front of me of what the June 30th of 2024 numbers look like in comparison, but basically, if there's a really good year on a market value basis, then that NPL is going to be a little bit lower than the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. But all of this is done by Eide Bailly. They do a proportionate share for each of the employers based on their methodology and to calculate the proportionate share of the NPL. We don't do that for the unfunded actuarial accrued liability. We don't break the unfunded by employer. So this has to be done this way because it's done by the auditors by employer. So that's we can't do it on the unfunded actuarial basis.
But to clarify, if I look at my financial statements in Lee County, there is a net pension liability on that financial statement. So that's what I know is, if I'm looking to see what Lee County owed, if we pulled out of the system, I would go to that number for the net pension liability is what I would look at.
If you want the source to match
So,
what the bill's
so this
related
basically would
to.
match the source to what I'm looking at.
Right.
If I decide to pull out, I've already got that number that I'm looking at.
Because it's on their financials and it's a GASB thing, and that's so it doesn't matter which one is
Right.
better or worse.
That's right.
That's right. And I guess it depends. The smoothing's what really tamps down the volatility of that net pension liability, which if you happen to get caught in a year where you go out of business and it's a 0% return year, well, you're probably gonna get hammered.
Mm-hmm.
And if
But-
it's a 32% year, boy, you may have just gotten a lot of grace over.
But that's what I'm
Over it
expecting,
otherwise.
because that's what I've seen
That's
on
right.
my financials.
That's something you can go back to the employer and go, it's right here.
Yeah.
It's on your audited financial statements.
And I don't.
And if it's
I
the
don't-
UAL,
I don't have the
we'll be
UAL
making,
anywhere. I
we'll
don't
be
know what
making
that
up
is.
the
If I'm-
reasons
if
why.
I'm not sitting here like and know what we're
Because
talking
GASB
about.
wouldn't allow you to use the smooth number, most likely.
Well,
Not
to
for
put
their
on for
financials.
MPL.
I
Right,
wouldn't guess
right.
they would. I don't, yeah.
That makes
my
sense.
suggestion would be this, that we use both numbers, because the smoothing methodology is what is acceptable to the actuaries. The net is what the employers want, and that's what the real dollars are on that day that they owe. But the smoothing is what is used on all of the projections. And if we just use the net, we don't have the smoothing built into the projection. Am I?
First of all, in my opinion, all of that would be taken care of with the original language and the existing language, because the same bill said something to the effect as done by, or as implemented by rules and regulations of the board. So if the bill were to pass and we get to that point, all of these kind of things, including this for that matter, could be considered in that regard. And it, going back to a little bit more background that I failed to mention the first time, the reason, as you probably know, the UAL was created the first time when the idea came up, when we were dealing with some issues 2 years ago or so, was because that's the term that's mostly in our actuarial reports, and that's what we use in the language more often. So that's where the unfunded acronym started, but just then, like Mr. Benson, Senator Sparks, and others, and I've said, that's why in doing this and trying to improve it in response to questions, we thought it would be better. To the dollar amount, and I want to ask Melanie, if you would, I'm sure it's back here, if I'm off, to my knowledge, the net pension liability in that report, if I'm looking at it correctly, would be, I guess you'd round it up to 26 billion. It's 25,967,426,000. That sound right? So that's the net pension liability. And then if you looked at the, as you know, the unfunded is 26.5. So this basically rounds up to 26 billion. That's the one. The actuarial unfunded is, on an actuarial basis, is, I would round to 26.5 billion, but it's 26,498,099,546. If you were to do that on a market value, it's going to be a little different, and that is 26,583,877,546. All those, of course, in those actuarial reports. But to go back to it, the net is a little. Your original question, the NPL is a little less compared to that, and it's because of that smoothing, I'm sure. At least I think that's my initial thought.
But all we're doing is tying, if somebody gets out, we're tying it to the net pension liability that we're already seeing on the financials. Where I might come apart is, if I don't know any better, is if you give me the UAAL and my net pension liability that I'm looking at is different. So I would want those to tie so that.
I want the bill to say what they actually owe.
Which would be MPL.
That's right.
That's what I want the bill to say now, because that's what, and the smoothing is not applicable to that. So I would want that language then.
And we'll still get, for our purposes, both.
Yeah,
Both
for
ends.
us, I would prefer both
We
languages
get
we're
both
gonna
ends
use.
right. I'll put that in form of a motion if we,
And what's that?
that we approve the changing of the wording from unfunded liabilities, actuarially unfunded liabilities, to net pension liability.
That's why I think that's
In
that.
proposed
Yeah,
legislation.
In proposed
proposed
legislation, because that,
legislation.
I think Senator DeBar even, he was like, if I'm comfortable with that, I'll remove my reverse repealer. So that would, I believe, satisfy his question.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I thought the meeting and discussion about it was very friendly. It was just this interest in the board's thing. I didn't take it as adversarial at all. It's very friendly.
I just think that what I heard was the gentleman said, I'd like that in writing. I think that's what he said from the board. So,
Yeah, I agree. It'll be in the minutes.
Chairman, do you entertain a second?
I do. Is there a second?
I would so move. Second.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion, questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Other business, Ray?
I do have one more, excuse me just a quick second. Yes, thank you. One, kind of along the same, in the same spirit, I would like to ask for your consideration, don't feel overly strong about it, but would like to mention it to you since we are here about the board considering a motion, something to the effect of, the board recommends that any new Tier 5 have an effective date of July 1, 2026 or later to allow for proper implementation, that or something like that. And a little background on that, that's something that I recommend, certainly. Any type of Tier 5, we need time to implement it. So I recommend that and have recommended that to Senator Sparks and have talked through communication with that and plan to continue to recommend that. And I don't think that should really be controversial, but given the sensitivity and the awareness on the language of changes and so forth yesterday, and given we happen to have a special meeting today, I thought I would bring that up because the current legislation has 2025 in there. So I would recommend the time to implement regardless and have done so and will continue to do so. And I think you would probably agree and feel likewise. But given the circumstances while we're here, I would ask for you to consider that since we're together. And I'm happy to explain some of the reasons why, but.
And that's Tier 5 only.
That's right. Any type of, if there's a Tier 5, PERS Tier 5, I guess you could apply the same logic to other things though, but I was talking about just Tier 5, yes, sir.
That's the big one. And Senator Sparks, you mentioned, alluded to this yesterday too.
I did, and
Which, I mean, you've worked on the bill. I mean, it does seem like, golly, July this year.
And that's just typically the effective date that they put in bills. I have no problem working with that. And I will say this, if you could do January 1, that'd be even better. I mean, in other words, I don't know, and I'm not asking for that discussion today. I'm not asking to get into that, but you know, you've got time to address that with the board and what you need, and we'll try to be as gracious as we can be in that regard.
Well, it could be that the motion is, and Ray, you can modify your recommendation or not, doesn't matter to me, that it could be as early as practicable, but not later than.
Or not earlier than.
So not early,
Right,
excuse
right.
me, yes, not earlier than July 1st, 2026.
My comment on that was when I heard you say you wanted it July 1, my thoughts were these. Number one, if a hybrid goes into effect, we don't know what instruments are going to be used for the employee to invest, in which to invest their money. We don't know if we're going to hire a third party to administer that, which would cost us more funds, or it would cost the employees more because they're going to have to pay fees for that money to be handled. Thirdly, was going through the board process for securing those third-party administrators. I just didn't see how we could get it done with 3 official meetings, you know, between now and July 1 to get all of that, because we have seen none of those details at all. We don't have a clue how that's going to work.
And that's, and Mr. Higgins has expressed that, and obviously I have told him from the get-go, they usually put the effective date as July 1 of 2025 on any legislation. That is not a hard date. I understand all the things you're saying, 100% agree. And it's a moot question until something passes to a great degree, but I want to give as much time as is needed, but I also want to do it as expeditiously as we can, but we'll certainly defer to the board on that.
I have one more question. Ed, in the hybrid, when you annuitize when you annuitize their contribution to their own plan, what was the lifetime that you used of that person drawing that money? I think it said a healthy individual, but I'd like a little something more like, how many years did you use?
Well, it varies. It's based on the mortality table that we use, the discount rate that we use. So, you know, it's based on the expected life expectancy of a member at that age. So I'd say for our example, for a 60-year-old, you know, the life expectancy is usually around 20 to 23 years, depending on if you're male or female. So that's our methodology that we use.
Okay, well, I was just wondering if it was 20 years or 25 years, because one of the downsides of any sort of defined contribution plan and the danger is the retiree outliving their annuity and their retirement, and that's one of the dangers, and I was wanting to know how you put that number and came to that number, and, you know, with my research, that's very similar to what I came up with. As a matter of fact, after retiree, our retirees on average are about 18.5 years before they reach their mortality.
It matches the mortality table that we currently use for PERS.
Okay.
Okay, you heard recommendation from the executive director for the board to adopt.
That the board would recommend that any PERS Tier 5 have an effective date of July 1, 2026 or later to allow for proper implementation.
You heard the
Of
motion.
course, we can,
And
and let me say this because I don't know that I've had the chance, but I really appreciate everyone's comments and work on this. I appreciate Senator Sparks' comments and work on that, and his comments and everything yesterday toward the system and the board. And on this matter, as he said, he's shared about being the default and willingness to work together on that and to be mindful of that. And he's already mentioned defer to the board or certainly listen to the board. I just know that there is the potential interest, should it pass, for it to be 2025. And I don't want to speak for Senator Sparks. I'm not going to now, but it may actually help him if we have that as far as the thing, or it's coming as a recommendation from me. But given the sensitivity about changing an acronym yesterday, and since we have a special called meeting, I thought I'd mention it and ask for it.
Ready to vote yet, or have we already voted?
heard the
Gotta have a
recommendation of staff. Is there a motion for that recommendation or amendment to it?
I'll make the motion.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any other questions?
This is for implementation date of July 26th
First,
or later.
2026.
For Tier 5, should the Tier 5 pass?
Okay,
I would second that.
it's been second.
Effective date, and just to, we can't,
Yep.
This is about implementing something. I mean, if it were to pass, you can pass the bill tomorrow. This just has to do with effective date, so you have time for implementation. Dr. McCoy mentioned several of those things.
I would second that.
We got a double second.
I know.
How many seconds we got?
There's a way to complicate it. We're gonna figure out a way to do it. So we've got a motion for an effective date from Mr. Benson for Tier 5 of July 1st, 2026,
Or later.
Or later.
or later.
I would like to comment on that.
All right.
Because now we're playing wordsmith. I think we're getting way too in the weeds on something that I've said I will work with the board to implement this plan. But when you start using the word effective date, you're talking about a legal term of art that deals with the bill. You're talking about implementation date.
Yeah.
Can we just agree to try to work on this? You know, I'm not, I'm not pushing for July 1, 2025. I don't know what the answer should be there. But I do want to be careful about using
Well,
Yeah, I think we're all
on the same
trying to
page.
get, yeah, it's just a question of how to get that in writing so that somebody doesn't
Sure.
say, does the PERS board, and you feel like you can't say yes. Go
Well,
ahead, Ray.
let me just say this again. I appreciate Senator Sparks, and it's not, I'm not necessarily worried about anything, but it's certainly not Senator Sparks that I'm worried about. So I appreciate where he's coming from, and I'll defer to the board, obviously. But from my standpoint, I'm happy to stand neutral, if you will, or withdraw my recommendation for now, if you like, but I still defer to y'all. But what I do want to make sure is very clear, very public, that, and I'm very much a can-do person, and we'll have very much a can-do approach, and if should something pass, we will implement it successfully. But I want to make sure everyone knows, for a variety of good reasons, that implementation is going to take time and it needs to be July 1, 2026 or later for a variety of reasons. I'm just sharing that because I'd be remiss if I didn't. And that's really where I'm coming from. But we're all on the same page and I'm happy to, I defer to the board, but I'm happy to pause on the recommendation or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but if somebody knows how to word it to where the option's there for the
How
board to
about-
decide how to do it before then, if they
about-
decide to. But they will not have a choice to implement it at July 1st, 2026. That's not the option.
Can you do something like this and say that it was a consensus of the board without a vote that implementation date would seem to be better July 1 of 2026 and have that recorded in the minutes? I don't know. I don't know the answer, but if we don't want to take a motion, can we say the consensus is of the board that it would take us that long to satisfy you, Mr. Director?
I'm fine with that.
Well,
And my original thing was recommend, but however y'all want to do that.
And
yeah.
it could be that the consensus of the board is to let Ray work this thing as he sees fit, knowing what he knows, and not lock it in, but they know Ray's gonna be
Because he
there
and
to
staff are
do.
gonna be the ones who have to do the implementation.
Right. I mean,
But most of it, but
That's
Dr.
what I
McCoy
was
touched on some things too, that
Right,
the
so
board
I
will be
mean-
involved in.
That's right.
Mr. Sparks, is that?
I just wanted to be very careful about saying effective date because then that begins to affect legislation. But again, I don't know that I've heard a timeline, but clearly we've been discussing Tier 5 for a long time. I don't do what they have to do, so I can't tell you what kind of implementation.
You're getting a better taste than some of us even have on how much there is to do.
Right.
So, but,
I'll withdraw my motion if that's the.
and would you, when I get, does that automatically withdraw the second
How
from
many we got?
Commissioner?
Do
There's a
we all
bunch
have
of
to
them.
Withdraw a second?
But I guess if there's no vote, no call for a vote, then the board just had to force a vote. So I think we could leave it as is unless Caroline has a different opinion and just say that, does anybody have opposition to delegating to Ray the implementation, aspects of implementation, and to his discretion to do that based on his knowledge and his working with the legislature?
That would be
Well,
lovely. Thank
okay.
you.
Anybody got a concern with that?
No.
All right, well, we ought to do that more often, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't mean that part before, I mean the delegating to Ray so he can take care of stuff. Okay, you got anything else, Mr.
No, sir, no,
Higgins?
no.
Good. Any other board members?
A personal privilege. I would like to recognize in attendance today is our longtime good friend, the senator from Monroe and surrounding areas, Senator Hal Bryant, and welcome you to our brief meeting.
My senator.
Well,
And my son.
We don't
No,
all
mine-
claim it.
mine.
You got it. Kim and I have the same, Kim and I have the same senator.
bless your heart, Senator Bryan. Did not know that both of them were your constituents. Glad to have you here. And thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Anything else from the board? All right, then we will call the meeting adjourned and we'll see everybody in at least 2 weeks or so.
Thank you, thank y'all.
Supposed to be presenting to the chancellor clerk here in about 50 minutes. I gotta go.
Ah.